Banco Ambrosiano was founded in Milan in 1896 by Giuseppe Tovini, a Catholic lawyer, with a founding charter that explicitly restricted shareholders to practicing Catholics, a design intended to keep the institution separate from what its founders called the corrupting influence of secular finance. For most of its first half-century, it operated as a conservatively run regional institution. That reputation for Catholic solidity would later become one of the tools Roberto Calvi used to obscure what was actually happening inside the bank, because it created a presumption of trustworthiness that regulators and foreign creditors were slow to question. Roberto Calvi joined Banco Ambrosiano as a junior employee in 1947 and rose steadily through the ranks, becoming chairman in 1975. Contemporaries described him as reserved and secretive rather than flamboyant. He had an extraordinary skill for cultivating connections outside the bank, including with Michele Sindona, a Sicilian financier who had built a network of offshore holding companies before his own fraud and collapse in 1974. Sindona's methods and connections overlapped with Calvi's. The Bank of Italy took note of the Sindona association, but the trail to Calvi's own activities moved slowly. The structural relationship at the center of the Ambrosiano story was between Calvi and the Vatican's in-house bank, the Istituto per l'Opera di Religione, known by its initials IOR. From 1971, the IOR was headed by Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, an American from Illinois with limited formal banking training but considerable institutional confidence. According to documents examined in subsequent Italian investigations and detailed in reporting by investigators and journalists, the IOR issued letters of comfort stating that it was aware of the debts of certain holding companies connected to Ambrosiano's foreign subsidiaries. Foreign creditor banks interpreted those letters as implicit guarantees. The IOR later disputed that reading. Whatever their precise legal weight, the letters gave Ambrosiano's overseas subsidiaries access to international credit they could not have obtained on their own merits. Calvi was also a member of Propaganda Due, the secret Masonic lodge known as P2, run by Licio Gelli. In March 1981, during a police search of Gelli's property, investigators found a membership list of nearly 1,000 names, including military officers, intelligence chiefs, cabinet ministers, journalists, and financiers. A subsequent parliamentary commission concluded that P2 had functioned as an informal network capable of moving information between institutions that were supposed to be independent of each other. Some historians argue this network provided Calvi with a layer of political protection that slowed regulatory action against Ambrosiano for years. Others caution that the precise mechanisms of influence are difficult to document from available records. What is clear is that the Bank of Italy had flagged irregularities at Ambrosiano as early as 1978, and the institutional response remained muted. The mechanics of the fraud, as reconstructed by Italian investigators in a 1982 Bank of Italy report and in subsequent criminal proceedings, worked through a layered chain of holding companies. Banco Ambrosiano subsidiaries in Luxembourg and Latin America lent large sums to a network of shell companies incorporated in Panama and other low-disclosure jurisdictions. Those companies used the loan proceeds to purchase shares in Banco Ambrosiano itself, which had the effect of inflating the bank's apparent capital. The beneficial ownership of the shell companies was never transparently disclosed. When investigators attempted to trace that ownership, many of the entities pointed circuitously back to IOR-connected accounts or to controllers who were never definitively identified in court. The result was a circular structure in which the bank's apparent financial strength rested on loans owed to it by companies it effectively controlled. The Bank of Italy inspected Banco Ambrosiano in 1978 and identified significant irregularities, particularly in the overseas subsidiary structure. Inspectors noted that large sums were flowing to foreign holding companies whose activities and ultimate ownership were not transparent. Italian banking law at the time gave the central bank limited direct authority over the foreign subsidiaries of Italian institutions, and enforcement was slow. In 1981, Calvi was prosecuted for violating Italian currency export laws, convicted, and sentenced to 4 years in prison. He was released pending appeal and, remarkably, remained in post as chairman of Banco Ambrosiano while the appeal proceeded, a fact that later drew significant criticism of Italian oversight at the time. By early 1982, the structure was visibly under stress. Foreign banks that had extended credit to Ambrosiano's Latin American subsidiaries, partly on the basis of the IOR letters, began requesting repayment. The subsidiaries could not repay without drawing down the shell companies, and the shell companies had no real assets that could be liquidated. In May 1982, the Bank of Italy sent Ambrosiano a formal letter demanding that the bank identify the ultimate borrowers behind the Latin American loans. The bank could not produce a satisfactory answer. According to reporting by investigators and journalists who covered the aftermath, Calvi made increasingly frantic attempts to locate new liquidity through contacts in Italy, Latin America, and the Vatican, but no fresh money materialized. On June 10, 1982, Roberto Calvi fled Italy using a false passport. He traveled through Austria and then England, staying briefly in London. On the morning of June 18th, his body was found hanging from scaffolding beneath Blackfriars Bridge over the River Thames. His pockets contained bricks, stones, and approximately $15,000 in mixed currencies. A British coroner's inquest returned a verdict of suicide in July 1982. That verdict was challenged. A second inquest in 1983 returned an open verdict, and Italian prosecutors subsequently pursued a murder investigation for years. In 2010, an Italian court acquitted 5 defendants charged with ordering or carrying out the killing, citing insufficient evidence. The cause of Calvi's death has never been definitively established by any court. His secretary, Graziella Carroccia, died in a fall from the Ambrosiano headquarters in Milan on the same day his body was discovered. With Calvi gone and no resolution for the subsidiary loans,